It's my pleasure now to invite Vice Chancellor, Punjab Agriculture University, Dr. B.S. Dillon, for extending a formal welcome and introducing today's speaker. Dr. Dillon, please.
Dr. Montek Ahluwalia is a renowned economist and has been Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission, Government of India. He was previously first Director of Independent Evaluation Office at IMF. Dr. Ahluwalia was born in New Delhi in 1943. He did his BA honors from St. Stephen College, Delhi, a very prestigious and known college. He received several honorary degrees, including an honorary degree of Doctor of Civil Law from University of Oxford and an honorary degree of Doctor of Science from Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, as well as another degree, DSc Honors Causa from Indian School of Mines. He is Honorary Fellow of Magdalen College. After graduation from University of Oxford, Dr. Ahluwalia joined World Bank in 1963, and at the young age of 28, when he was 28, he became youngest division chief of World Bank bureaucracy, in charge of income distribution division in the World Bank's Development Research Center. A review of former Honorable Prime Minister of India, Dr. Singh and Dr. Montek Ahluwalia are recognized as main architects of transforming Indian economy from low growth economy to relatively high growth economy linked with market forces and international economy. This lecture is very, very timely. Now I have the opportunity, I have the pleasure to invite Dr. Montek Ahluwalia for the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dillon. Dr. Khush, Mrs. Khush, other distinguished people sitting on the dais, academic, faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first of all say that it's a great pleasure to come here to PAU. You already heard, you all know. You know, it's a special privilege to deliver a lecture which is in honor of Dr. Khush. I don't want to simply repeat all the things about him that you've already heard. That would just take too long. The important thing is that he is an iconic person, not just in the world of agricultural scientists, but also among economists. So it's especially nice to be able to give a lecture named after him. And also, if I may say so, to acknowledge the generosity of Dr. Khush, Mrs. Khush, and the family for establishing this foundation, into which he has put all the many prize money receipts that he has received. It's really a wonderful gesture. More than a gesture, it's a wonderful action, and one that will inspire many, many people, younger people, in later life. So thank you, sir, for all that you have done. I'm aware that I'm an economist talking to scientists. Now, scientists don't take economists very seriously. And, there's a good reason for that. Because, by and large in the world of science, there is a sort of agreement on what is correct. There's some dispute, but by and large, after a little bit of discussion, there can be agreement. This is not the case in economics. You can have very, very distinguished economists who think that policy should move in this direction. And for every distinguished economist who thinks that, I can give you another, equally distinguished, teaching in equally distinguished universities, whether in India or abroad, who think the opposite. In a way, that's a nice thing about economics, because economics is actually much more complicated. It's about, if you might put it this way, it's about modeling structures whose driving forces are not always well understood and which are actually multiple. And most economists simplify that by assuming away most things and saying, no, these are the driving forces. And obviously, if you choose different driving forces, you can get very different results. And yet, it's not possible to take everything into account. So inevitably, what happens is economists differ, and you have to listen to them and then make up your own mind which fellow is actually saying the right thing. You know, the best characterization, this is something that can frustrate practical people. You know, I used to attend on behalf of the government this World Economic Forum meeting that takes place in Davos. These are very practical fellows who run businesses and so on. And one of the jokes about economists that I heard there, I think is very valid. It's two top corporate people in the bar in a hotel in Davos, and one fellow says to the other, so what's new in your firm? And he says, well, you know, I've hired a senior economist. So the first fellow says, what on earth for? He said, you know, they may have something useful to contribute in our decision making. Anyway, a year later, they meet again in Davos, probably in the same hotel, in the same bar, and he says, so what's new? And the first fellow says, you know, I've hired another economist. So this time, the first fellow is really puzzled. So why did you do that? And he said, so they can talk to each other. You know, this is the fate of a lot of economics. But I still feel that it's useful, in the sense that you don't have to treat your economist the way you would treat your cardiologist. I mean, if the cardiologist says, you know, something you need to do, you better take a good look at that. But it's good to let them talk to each other and hear what they have to say. It's very important to have them talk to each other because please do not treat them like scientists. They are really people who can shine some light on different parts of the system. And as long as you have them shining lights on different parts of the system, you get a good sense of what the problems are. So a lot of my comments on this agricultural challenges, etc., I'm aware that I'm talking as an economist, and I'm talking mainly to a bunch of agricultural scientists, many of whom are at the top of their profession, many of whom are rising, hopefully, to the top of their profession. So this is just a kind of a cautionary remark to begin with. So the first thing on agriculture, let's get some facts right. You know, what is actually happening on agriculture in India? You know, basically, for a long time, you know, we are very good at slogans. I mean, Panditji coined many, many years ago the slogan that everything can wait but not agriculture. But actually the truth is that agriculture was never the central focus of policy in the early 30 years. Most of it was focus on industry and a little bit of focus on big dams. And interestingly, this goes to what I think Dr. Thielen was saying, the difference in outcomes. I mean, if you look at outcomes, it's just not true that the big dams have made the big difference. As far as agriculture is concerned, the real source of irrigation has been groundwater. And many people actually say that the real contribution of the big dams is that they produce a lot of canals that have allowed a lot of water to seep into the ground. So they have helped in the collection of groundwater, which is subsequently utilized. I mean, but in the early 30s, that was the case. And then you had the Green Revolution, late 60s, early 70s. That made a big difference. I mean, you must have heard, and every Punjabi bores the rest of the country by saying, you know, we made the country food self-sufficient, and but for you, the country would be starving, and so on. And it was a very, very important change. Because that was a time when the government of India was under constant pressure because it couldn't really meet its food requirements without PL 480 imports. And that is actually when Mrs. Gandhi decided that, you know, She was going to sort of make sure that we become food self-sufficient, and a lot of the experimenting with new technology, the Mexican wheat, etc., was given a strength. And Punjab farmer responded magnificently. There's no question about that. I want to tell you, I think, again, this goes back to what Vice Chancellor said. When I say there are problems in agriculture, I'm not saying there are problems with our farmer. I mean, all the evidence suggests that given the right incentives, the Indian farmer does an extremely good job. But there are real problems on policy, and those are not problems that the farmer can be blamed for. So I just want to mention this right at the beginning, that when I say things are wrong, it is not the fault of the farmer, it's the fault of the policy environment that has got created. So this is a preface. Now with this, one thing you must remember is that, during the Green Revolution period, which, let's say, if you take the early period between 1970 to, say, mid-1980s, Punjab agricultural growth was about 5.7%, which is actually fantastic. But remember that national agricultural growth was still only 2.3. So the Green Revolution was a great achievement for Punjab and led to a lot of food security. It didn't make that much difference to what was happening to agriculture as a whole in the country. In the next period, middle of 1980s to about 2005, national agricultural growth became 2.9%. A little bit better than earlier. It was earlier 2.3, it became 2.9. Punjab agricultural growth decelerated from 5.7 to 3. Okay, I mean, you can't have a continuing burst of high growth, so you decelerated, but still Punjab was a little bit higher, only a little bit higher than the rest of the country. Now look at what has happened in 2005 to 2014. That is the most recent period of about 10 years or so. India's agricultural growth went up to 3.5%. Below the target, because the target was 4%, but still slowly doing better as a whole. Punjab's agricultural growth went down to 1.6%. So I'm saying that for the country as a whole, agricultural performance improved, but it fell short of the target. I mean, we should have been better than that. Actually, many people tell me that even the 4% target, we had fixed that in the 11th plan and in the 12th plan for the country as a whole. That's not a very ambitious target. I mean, given the numbers of people in rural areas, we could have planned for a higher growth rate, but since we weren't getting it, we had a reasonable target. Punjab's growth rate in agriculture going down to 1.6 is really a bad outcome, because it is not the case that Punjab is at the frontier of productivity. And I'll come to some of that. I mean, China is still way ahead of Punjab in terms of productivity. And remember that I'm talking about Chinese average, whereas Punjab is the most productive part of the country. So I think we could have done better in Punjab on agriculture. And we'll come back to why that didn't happen. Now look at the national comparison. China, during the initial period of agricultural modernization, Deng Xiaoping and so on, the average growth rate was 7.1%. So the Chinese breakthrough in agriculture, for 10 years or so, they had a growth rate of 7.1% in agriculture. And then they've slowly come down. In the last 10 years, it's only 4%. But that's after a prolonged burst. So to my mind, that should be sort of the target, both for India and also within India for Punjab, that we should be trying to set as a standard. Now, I mentioned that, I realize that it's not easy to compare performance across countries. There are climatic differences in this, that, and the other. But my feeling is that, and I don't know the latest data on this, but I did know this 6 or 7 years ago, that the gap for Indian soils and Indian climate, the gap between the productivity being achieved on average and what can be achieved in a best farm with best capabilities is still quite large. Now, obviously, every farmer cannot become the best, but you know, we could target halving that productivity difference. And you know, my feeling is that why that's not happening is actually due to policy, not due to the farmer. So that is really the challenge that we have to take up. You know, against this picture, you also get a big story which is now highlighted in the newspapers on rural distress and farmer distress, which gets manifested in farmer suicides and, you know, frankly, with the much greater connectivity and information. Wherever there's a problem in the country, it is projected into your home through television. I'm not trying to say, by the way, that these problems are not serious, but we have to remember that the awareness, people's awareness of the problem is magnified by a media that is now interested in, you may say, put it positively, I'm not saying they're being negative, they're interested in bringing home to everybody that not everything is not right. So, for example, if you have a shortfall, a crop loss in one part of Maharashtra, it's not surprising, and it happens year after year, it's not just an annual event. You will get a lot of farmer suicides. That immediately gets picked up and projected in the television as if this is farmer distress across the country as a whole. There are problems across the country as a whole, but they get magnified because we have a degree of news and television communication which we actually didn't have earlier. It's a bit similar to what happened in the United States in the 1970s with the Vietnam War. I mean, whatever was going on in Vietnam was projected into everybody's home, and that's how they realized what is actually happening. So we're seeing that. We're seeing this not just with farmers. We're seeing this with anti-women behavior, gender imbalance, gender injustice. We're seeing this in terms of caste violence. We're seeing this in terms of communal violence, all kinds of things. So, is there real farm distress? I think there are real problems. I mean, one point I've already mentioned, that even if you have an overall good performance, you know, agriculture is subject to risks, and we don't have good systems of mitigating the risk. Now, if you had good systems of mitigating the risk, then you would have a crop shortfall, you might have an income shortfall, but the person would not be driven to suicide. And then the focus would just be that you've got a shortfall. We don't have good systems that will insulate farmers from risks, and the solution really lies in seeing how we can move to building that. Second issue really is that it is not the case that farm income as a whole has not been rising. Now this is interesting because if you read the newspapers, they continually say that, you know, farm incomes are doing very badly. I was looking at a paper by Ramesh Chand, who's an agricultural economist. He is now member of the Niti Aayog, which is the institution that replaced the Planning Commission. And you know, in this paper, he's made an interesting point. He's done a comparison between farm income per hectare. Now, farm income per hectare takes out the paid out costs of inputs and so on. It's just the income that accrues, including his own labor and the surplus over paid out costs per hectare. And he's compared that with per cultivator. Okay? So here are the numbers, and they're quite interesting. Between 1983-84 and 93-94, about 10-year period, the per hectare growth of farm income was 3.73%. The per cultivator growth was actually per 2.7%. And this is because the number of cultivators per hectare was increasing. More people depending on the same area. In the next period, between 93, 94 and 2004, another 10-year period, the per hectare income is little less than earlier, the growth rate. Instead of 3.7, it's about 3.4. The per cultivator collapses from 2.7 to 1.9, or let's say 2. Because too much population living on the same amount of land. But in the last 10 years, well, it's not, 2004 to 2011, that's the most recent period for which this data is available, he says two things. One, that the per hectare income, the growth rate of per hectare income has increased to 5.3%. From 3.7, 3.4, it's now 5.3. And the per cultivator income has gone up to 7.3. And this is really the result of a combination of higher productivity and higher prices. I mean, farm income, a lot depends on how much you're getting for the output as opposed to how much you're paying for the input. So during this period, 2004 to 2011, basically farm prices rose compared to input costs. One reason why they rose, of course, is that globally the price of agricultural commodities was going up. But the second reason is that for policy, we didn't try to fight it. And that, at that time, the UPA government had a very clear perception that farmers are entitled to the benefit of rising international prices. So although as international prices rose, domestic prices were also allowed to rise, didn't try to depress them, and that led to a 7.29% increase in farm income. This is, by the way, the period when we had the biggest decline in poverty. You know, in the past 3 decades, the percentage of population below the poverty line was falling. It was falling, not very rapidly, but it was falling. But the absolute number were not falling because total population was increasing. In this period, the percentage decline in the percentage of the population below the poverty line actually was faster than earlier. And as a result of that, the number of people below the poverty line went down very sharply. You know, in the period up to 83, 94, the percentage went down a little bit, but the absolute number of poor increased by 7 million. In the second period, the percentage went down more sharply, and the number of people below that poverty line fell by 140 million. That was a period when, for the first time, India was able to show some kind of a result similar to what has been seen in China earlier, where a couple of 100 million people were taken above the poverty line. So here's a result of 3 different things happening. 1, productivity went up. 2, prices were supported. And 3, the number of people in agriculture declined. And that decline, it's not that people were thrown off the land. The rest of the economy was growing rapidly. Investment was booming. Construction was booming because of infrastructure investment. And it provided a basis for farm labor to supplement what they were getting as agricultural laborers with what they were getting by working in construction. So, and these factors within the farming community, the rise in real wages was sometimes treated as a negative factor, but the fact that farm product prices were rising enabled them to pay those and still have a rising growth of income. This is actually an example of how in economics, or in the analysis of an economic system, many things are operating and they have to keep track of each of them. So in this particular case, as I've said, land productivity up, prices moving in favor of the farmer, people moving out of farms and going into construction. And the net effect was that farm incomes went up. I mean, right now, the government is talking about doubling farm incomes in 7 years. Now, you know, to double farm incomes in 7 years, you need a 10% growth in real income. It's not going to happen. You can't have a 10% growth per annum in productivity. But the only way you could do it is if somehow all these three things work together. The last of these three things, which is taking people off the land, depends on how the rest of the economy behaves. Because it's the employment generated in both the urban areas and in the non-agricultural part of the rural areas that will determine that. And by the way, the non-agricultural part of rural areas is now become much more important than it used to be. So these are the things that we have to look at. And policy needs to focus on those. Now, apart from this, I think agriculture itself, just the production of agriculture, is changing much more than people realize. You, of course, are focusing on agriculture, so what I'm going to say is not new for you. But I don't think the public is aware of it, nor do our own agricultural spokespersons emphasize this aspect, because we are still hung up on the grain revolution, wheat and rice. Rice, of course, at this point I should mention, we owe a lot to the work that Dr. Khush did. But these were the big things in the 70s and 80s. But today what is happening is agricultural diversification is taking place. So let me give you some sense of what these numbers amount to for India as a whole. You know, cereals, which includes rice and wheat and, you know, grains and so on, in 1990, the percentage of total value of agricultural output, gross value of agricultural output accounted for by cereals was 27%. By 2000, 10 years later, it had gone down to 24, and in 2014, it had gone down to 18. Now, what had changed? Fruits and vegetables was 14 in 1990, increased to 18.5 in 2000, and increased to 19.4 in 2014. So the share of output of fruits and vegetables is greater than the share of output of all cereals taken together. All cereals is 18%, fruits and vegetables now 19.4. Milk. It was 15% in 1990, went up to a little over 18% in 2000, is now 21.3%. So the value of milk is more than the value of fruits and vegetables and more than the value of cereals. And of course meat has also gone up, but it's only gone up from 4 to 6.6, so it's, that kind of change will occur at much higher income levels. Now it's interesting to see what has happened to Punjab using the same metric. Now, you know, in the case of Punjab, rice, in 1990, 21% of the value of agricultural output in Punjab was rice. In 2014, 22.2%. So actually, instead of diversifying away from rice, which is what Captain Amrinder Singh was talking about 2 days ago, the economy is sort of diversified, not diversified, but intensified into rice. And fruits and vegetables, there's diversification. It's gone from 4.6% to 7.1%. But you know, this is too little for the country as a whole. If the share is 19.4%, to my mind, one of the challenges that we could take up in Punjab is a much bigger diversification into horticulture. Now, the entire ecosystem and ecostructure needed for horticulture is different from cereals. But you know, if you accept this as a 10-year challenge, then I don't think it's impossible. Now, technically, for example, if Punjab rice, for example, had gone up from 21% to 22%, you know, 3 to 4% of this could go out of rice and into fruits and vegetables. I mean, we need to set transformation targets that will capture these kinds of changes. And then the fellows who are responsible for policy have to work out what is required to do that. I mean, another big problem in Punjab is that, you know, compared to, incidentally, when it comes to diversification, maize is a very important thing that Punjab could diversify into. I mean, it's easier to procure maize than to procure vegetables. I mean, it can be done by a somewhat centralized body. And there are huge downstream processing possibilities with maize. So that is something that needs to be, if Chief Minister's objective that we should get out of rice is to be fulfilled, then both fruits and vegetables and fodder and maize and milk, and the maize would provide the fodder for the livestock, is a holistic kind of strategy which can be adopted. But you know, when you come to organized structures, look at this comparison. Only 10% of Punjab milk is procured by the organized sector. In Gujarat, it's 49%. Now, frankly, if you really want to support a sort of white revolution in Punjab, it has to be done through a much bigger expansion of organized sector procurement and processing and so on. I have no idea whether, I mean, Gurkha is supposed to do similar things to what Amul was doing, but it doesn't have to be only done by the cooperative sector, it can be done by the private sector also. But that's certainly an area where we need to do much more. And I think that, you know, Ashok Gulati, who gave the first Khush lecture some years ago, has been writing regularly in the Indian Express. Maybe you've seen some of his articles. But you know, he makes the point that if you want to go into fruits and vegetables, you have to have it. He calls it a plate to plow approach, but actually it should be plow to plate approach, because that's the direction of movement. An integrated value chain, so you can tell what's being grown, how's it being picked up, who's marketing it, how does it get processed, where does it go to market. Now let me come to some policy issues. I know that you want some time for questions, and I would also enjoy that. So I'll deal with these very, very briefly. I mean, why are things not happening as much as they should? Well, my view is there are well-known policy constraints, and I was saying to Dr. Joel, who is, I've learned more from him about agriculture than almost anyone else, and I told him that, you know, Dr. Dhillon talked about outcomes, that, you know, when we were in the Planning Commission, we started this focus on outcomes. Don't tell us how much you spent on something, what is the outcome? So I was telling Dr. Joel that, you know, if he were to judge the quality of the teaching he gave to me, in terms of whether I learned all that stuff, he would rank very high as a professor. But if he were to judge it in terms of what impact I was able to have to change the policies, then I think his ranking would be very low. Mine would also be, but that's the real point. This is known stuff, what I'm going to say. The sad thing is, I do not see an analytical, I don't see a conviction on the part of the system that, look, we've got to solve these problems. So let me briefly tell you what they are. Clearly, water and scientific use of water is going to be absolutely critical. The Prime Minister has coined this very good slogan, more crop per drop. Absolutely right. That's what we need. But the problem is that merely by articulating it, it's not going to happen. So you have to ask yourself, why isn't it happening? Well, it's not happening for the simple reason that water, which is an extremely scarce resource, and which, if you worry about climate change, is going to become even scarcer, is currently not priced appropriately. I mean, canal water in any case was underpriced, but 80% of the water that agriculture uses actually comes from groundwater, not canal water. The only cost of extracting groundwater is electricity, and that unfortunately is free. And I'm sorry to say that Punjab is a lead in this because other states were not doing this, but Punjab gave the lead, and innumerable states now have either almost free electricity or free electricity. Now, what has happened? We know that. What has happened is that the water table is falling at 70 centimeters per year. I think the NASA satellite was able to pick up the depletion of groundwater simply from the whatever magnetic or other waves that is able to detect, that they saw there was a bit of a fall in the water level in this part of the country because of excessive use of water. So what do we do about it? Nobody, by the way, disputes this. I mean, this is not one of those cases where one fellow says, no, this is a problem, the other fellow says, not a problem. Everybody agrees that this is a problem. There are only two ways of taking care of this problem. One is if you could do quantity rationing. That you find a system where each farmer who has X hectares of land that he's operating, that you can somehow control how much water he gets. Now the short answer is you can't. I mean, the present legal situation is that if I have a borehole on my land, I can pump out as much water as I want. That's the legal position. And since you are giving me electricity free, I would be a fool not to pump it out, because the cost of depletion of water table is not the water table of my field, it's the water table of the entire aquifer. So it's a classic case where the resource is going to be misused. So if you can't ration it, and there are legal reasons why you can't. I mean, you could ration it if you decided to nationalize the groundwater and say that only public sector wells, pumps will be able to operate. And these pumps will give so much water to each farmer. I can assure you, the farmer will quickly move to more crop per drop. I mean, the Israelis have the technology, we have the technology. But we're not doing that. Now, frankly, if you're not doing that, there's only one other solution, and that is you have got to stop this free electricity. Now, thanks to Dr. Joel's education, I've been saying this for 20 years, and it has had no effect anywhere. Nobody disagrees, by the way, that this is a problem. Nobody also disagrees that if we don't do this, that at least in Punjab, the water table will fall by 7 meters in another 10 years. But having said that, if you ask someone, and we don't have any representatives of the Punjab government, but if you ask the current Agriculture Secretary, do you believe that Punjab can tolerate a 7-meter drop in the water table? And by the way, I understand that it's not just a drop. I mean, when you get a drop, then all the kind of salinity of the water increases and it becomes vastly inferior water, etc., etc. He would not say no. And so you say, well, so what are you doing to prevent that from happening? And the short answer would be nothing. And this is not just Punjab's problem. I mean, Punjab in many ways is well positioned because the Indo-Gangetic plain happens to have a geology where if you stop using the water too much, the replenishment will come very quickly, because assuming that the rainfall continues the way it is, which climate change we don't know, but it'll be replenished. In the Deccan Plateau, we are tapping water resources which have accumulated over hundreds of years, and we are extracting them from an area where the subsequent reabsorption of water is going to be very, very low. So it's not just a disaster for Punjab, it's actually a disaster for very large parts of the country. I regret to say that if one was seriously asked the question, do we have a solution for this? The answer that you will get is micro-irrigation. That's fine. But you know, why would a farmer incur the expense of micro-irrigation if he can pump up the water for free with free electricity? And then the answer will be, then we should subsidize irrigation also, micro-irrigation also. You know, frankly, this is just a recipe for fiscal disaster. So this is point number one. We need this is not an agricultural scientist problem, but in a way it is. Because, after all, it is the total effect of all these things that's going to determine productivity. Big issue. Second, imbalance in fertilizer use. I mean, it's well known and has been said for 20 years that we have massively subsidized urea, and the result of that is completely imbalanced application. Too much urea, not enough of other things. I'm not an agricultural scientist, but I've been told by agricultural scientists that it's not just the imbalance between the major nutrients. If you pump in a lot more urea, it's going to suck up a lot of the micronutrients. So the nutritional deficiency that's being caused in the soil by the effort to utilize as much of the nitrogen as possible is having very big long-term damage effects on agriculture, on the soil. It's the easiest thing in the world to sort of simply get up and say that we have to get out of this fertilizer subsidy. It can't be removed instantly. But you could very easily have a 5-year program to jack up fertilizer price year after year. And I would return the money to the farmers. I mean, the simplest thing to do, and this has been talked about, is create a lump sum transfer to the farmer per hectare. That is, the fertilizer price goes up and the farmer's account gets credited every year by a certain lump sum amount. If he's willing to use that amount to use the same amount of fertilizer, good luck to him. But if he wants to save that amount for other things and pay for the fertilizer, he'll be much better off. And he won't misuse the fertilizer. A lot of people wrongly say that, they mispresent that China has a much higher fertilizer use than India. That's true. And they get high output. But they are going in for a much more balanced fertilizer use. Increasing total fertilizer use by increasing urea is not going to have the same effect. And again, deregulating the price of fertilizer, jacking up the price, don't give any subsidy to fertilizer companies. Quite honestly, if they want to shut down, let them shut down. You can import it from wherever it's available. Just give the money to the farmer and let him decide how he wants to use it. No net increase on the fiscal deficit, direct benefit to the farmer, and we will have a much better pattern of application of fertilizer. I've not seen another way of solving this problem, but unfortunately, both on electricity and fertilizers, we're not being able, over many years, to get political traction. Now let me make one other point here. Some things belong in the realm of the states and some things belong in the realm of the center. The fertilizer subsidy is a central government decision. The power subsidy is a state government decision. So one has to ask oneself, why is it that in individual states, because the states are bearing the burden of this cost, why don't they switch to give a subsidy to the farmer and get rid of this imbalance? Many years ago, it used to be said that, look, the central government can finance this shift. But things have changed. I mean, in those days, the central government used to give the states 24% of the tax revenue. Today, the central government gives the states 42% of the tax revenue. And what is more, a new finance commission has been just set up, so they'll probably end up increasing it further. The ability of the central government to solve problems in sectors which belong to the states is actually now very severely limited. So any effort to say center must help in diversification, to my mind, doesn't make that much sense. If we are going to diversify, which we should, into fruits and vegetables particularly, then clearly the market arrangements have to be totally different. You cannot have some central government or state government agency buying brinjals and tomatoes and other perishable commodities. You need a revolution in agricultural marketing. These arguments are now well known, so I won't go into it. But the critical question is, the central government has nothing to do with this. I mean, if there is a state government chief minister who wants to modernize agricultural marketing, he can do it in 25 hours, that's it. Only thing is that the existing vested interests have to be confronted. And the bureaucracy knows exactly what to do. It's not a rocket science, but so far we have seen no progress in this whatsoever. Here and there, some changes have been made in the Agricultural Products Marketing Committees Act, but they're really negligible. So this is a big challenge that needs to be taken up. Two other points and then I will stop. One is that if we go into fruits and vegetables, we're obviously also going to get into the processing of these things. And there I feel that the present GST rate on a lot of processed items is too high. It should be lowered to the lowest possible. It's kind of tempting to think that, tomato sauce and ketchup is a luxury item. But the fact of the matter is that if you want to create a demand for tomatoes during the flush season that will feed a much larger processed food market, then and you should keep in mind who's going to benefit from this. It's really the farmer, not just the consumer. So I think a tax rate that encourages food processing is an issue that should be high on the agenda. This again is not something that can be done by either the state government or the central government, because now that power to decide those rates has shifted to the GST Council, which is presided over by the central government but has all the states in it. So actually, I don't know who, but they are the ones that need to be lobbied to do this. And finally, research. I'm speaking to India's best, either number one or you've now again become number one, either number one or number two, best agricultural university. But I should mention that the general impression abroad is that we have not maintained, for India's agricultural universities as a whole, that we have not really achieved the standards that we should be achieving. I'm not making this point about PAU, but I'm talking about the country as a whole. And I think the agricultural research units, institutions should basically benchmark themselves against relevant benchmarks. I mean, I know that it is a legitimate thing for PAU to feel proud that you're ranked as the best Indian research institution. But it would be interesting to know how we compare with the best 3 Chinese institutions, or the best institution in Southeast Asia, or for that matter, the best institution in some parts of Central America. So I think those kinds of things should be done. And going beyond that, you need to think about what it is in the structure of our institutions that denies them the flexibility that they need in order to really do first-class work. There was, many, many years ago, a report by Mashelkar and another one by M.S. Swaminathan on how to restructure the Indian agricultural research system. It's a central government issue. And I feel that on many critical recommendations there, we didn't do enough. Last point, and I really will stop. Genetically modified food. Now, this has become a sensitive issue in India, but it's very interesting how it's evolved. I mean, on the one hand, there's absolutely no doubt that the extraordinary success of cotton in this country and the fact that we've become a major exporter of cotton is due to the use of BT cotton. That became controversial because the BT cotton came originally from Monsanto. So I think we need a clear picture here that are we going to deny Indian farmers access to technology simply because the technology is developed abroad? And we don't deny Indian industry that. We're quite happy to have, and that's the right approach. Now, if there is too high royalty being charged, well, that's an issue related to price control over royalty given the general policies that we have. But there is a section that is actually opposed to bringing in these things because they are run by international multinationals. look at the difference between India and China. We seem to be driving Monsanto out of India. The Chinese have gone and bought Syngenta, which is one of the major companies going in for this kind of research. So I think this is an area that we need to worry about. And further, the negative attitude towards genetically modified food or agriculture has spread beyond multinationals, even to Indian research. I mean, Deepak Pental, former Vice Chancellor of Delhi University, and his team had invented and asked for permission for GM mustard, BT mustard, or something, some kind of genetically modified mustard, right? That permission has not been given. Although there is the relevant clearing agencies, etc., have cleared. So, you know, there's something on which we need clarity, and it can only come from the government. Because quite honestly, it is not possible to advise young people, and you have many young people here who have tremendous capability. It's not possible to advise them to work on genetically modified agriculture if somehow they're not going to be allowed to get permission. So this is an area where we do need to come clean, and I'm very clear that given the nature of the threat of climate change, again we talk about it all the time, to rule out the genetically modified route, we would be unique in the world doing that. It makes no sense to me. I'm entirely sympathetic with the idea that before we allow these things to come in, we should have very tight monitoring of, you know, do they have adverse effects, and even if that takes an extra year or so, that's not a problem. But to take a mechanical approach which says no, I mean, there's a lot of research we can do which is not related to genetic modification, but since this is one of the big things that's happening in the world of technology, it is something that we need to focus on much more. Well, with those words, let me once again thank you for inviting me and for sharing my thoughts.